Introduction. You are not alone. We might not know each other, and I haven't had a chance to hear your story, but I'm pretty sure I already know a lot about you. You've been carrying around a secret that's kept you living your life in a state of low-level fear, wondering when you'll be found out. You fooled everyone into believing you're better than you are, putting on an act of knowing what you're doing and working extra hard to avoid detection. If people really knew you, they'd see the cracks in the surface. Most of your big accomplishments have just been luck or the result of being in the right place at the right time. In truth, you're an imposter. You may not feel this way all the time, but when you do, this pervasive self-doubt and insecurity creates a cloud over everything you do, a constant nagging feeling of stress and anxiety which affects both your work and your relationships. This might push you to keep reaching for perfection, but as perfection doesn't exist, you rarely feel satisfied or content with your achievements or with who you are. Family, friends, and colleagues see you as capable and accomplished. They don't know about your inner turmoil. To them, it seems that everything is okay, or better than that. They think you're doing well. They may even wish they were doing as well as you. But you know they've got it wrong. You're just putting on a front. You're good at giving the impression that you're competent. The version they see is far from the truth. On the rare times you do open up to family or friends, they dismiss your concerns, unable to match up what you're saying with what they see you as capable of. They may feel that you need to have your ego bolstered when in reality you're simply scared. As a result, you often feel misunderstood and that no one else knows the full extent of your feelings. Only you know the truth, that you're just scraping by. You have to work harder than everyone else to prevent anyone discovering who you really are, or you procrastinate terribly when given a big task and put together half your projects seconds before the deadline. You're nothing special and are only where you are thanks to luck, contacts, or because you worked harder than everyone else. When you do well, which you almost always do, you tell yourself anyone could have done it. You were just in the right place at the right time. You might have managed it this time, but how long can it last? When things don't go according to plan, this is all you can think about. Self-criticism weighs in as you repeatedly replay what went wrong in your mind. If you've been given positive feedback, you think that's just because people like you when they're being nice. It was the team's success more than yours, whereas if you make a mistake, it's all yours. You have a library of responses up your sleeve, and you're armed and ready to use them. So no matter what you do, you find it impossible to take on board your successes. You hold tightly to the belief that you aren't good enough, and you've been methodically building your argument to support this belief in your head for years. When you hear any scant evidence that fits with it, you're all ears, while anything that doesn't fit with this view is dismissed. No matter how much evidence there is to contradict your view, you're unable to internalize your accomplishments and you feel uncomfortable when praised. This makes it almost impossible to own your achievements or to see yourself as competent and able. Even if you've been in your job for years, this feeling stays with you as your view of yourself remains unchanged. When you do well or things work out yet again, this doesn't help. It only makes it worse. The more success you achieve, the more pressure you feel as your responsibility and visibility increase. Instead of questioning yourself or changing your view, you just feel relief that you've managed to succeed this time and that no one has discovered the truth. You've got away with it again. This feeling ruins the moments when you achieve your goals or simply do something great. You quickly sweep these away, sure that you're even more likely to be found out. Even the best occasions are tainted by it. You rarely celebrate your achievements or feel comfortable and easy about doing well. It's so much harder to enjoy life when you're carrying this weight around with you. Eve knew this all too well. When they told Eve she'd got the job, she just felt shock. when she'd applied for it, there was no part of her that believed she'd actually get it. She clearly wasn't the same calibre as the other applicants. They were all graduates, and she only had on-the-job experience. She'd got terrible grades at school and had been lucky to find a job she could stick at. She'd worked hard and had some good connections, but she was nothing special. If she could do this, anyone could. People always warmed to Eve. She knew she made a good impression in interviews, but that was just superficial stuff. Anyone could fool people into believing they could do something when they'd only spent an hour with them. It was much harder to keep this belief going when you were part of a company and seeing these people every day. She was in way over her head. The company may have overlooked her grades because they'd liked her so much, but would they still like her when they saw her work wasn't as good as everyone else's? She knew they'd made a huge mistake. She felt it deep in the pit of her stomach, alongside a crippling self-doubt. The only way she was going to get through this was to keep attention away from herself, get everything done, work hard at it, keep going and never make a mistake. Eve felt terrified at the start of every new project, but she somehow managed to pull everything together every time there was a deadline. She worked long hours and at weekends to hide the fact that she was struggling. She took a painfully long time drafting emails to check the wording and accuracy, and was unable to share any of her work until it was perfect. Meetings filled her with dread. She wanted to speak up, but she never risked it, in case she exposed herself. When she did have to present, she agonized for hours over her presentation, practicing and practicing until she knew it off by heart. She rarely took holidays, as her absence might give people a chance to see what was really going on, and despite encouragement from her manager, she avoided the bigger projects. On the rare occasions she did get negative feedback, it crushed her, staying with her for weeks as she went over and over what had been said. It didn't seem to matter how much positive feedback she got or how much she accomplished, she couldn't shake the feeling of failure. She managed to keep things going, but every time she got over another hurdle, she'd feel exhausted at the prospect of having to do it again. She thought she might grind to a halt under the weight of it all. Everyone thought she was brilliant, but that just made everything worse. It was only a matter of time before they discovered the truth. Her success was undeserved. They should never have taken a chance on her in the first place. When you're plagued by these fears, you're in a very lonely place. You overwork, focusing only on your mistakes, and are fearful of speaking up or taking a wrong step. At times, you avoid everything. While Eve's experiences may fit with some of your own, I'm sure you can also see that she isn't completely right about herself. How can she be doing this well, receiving positive feedback and seen as brilliant, if she really is no good at her job? Does liking someone really mean that people overlook everything else? There's a name for how Eve is feeling: imposter syndrome. And the trouble with imposter syndrome is that it can make you reach conclusions that don't quite add up. You'll find what I'm going to say next harder to believe, but bear with me. You are intelligent. You have already achieved things. Otherwise, what would you have to doubt? And I'm guessing you have a proven track record of success. You have qualifications and a good job. You may even have several degrees. Imposters like to be well trained before they can acknowledge that they're experts. Maybe you didn't go to university or college, but now you're doing really well, as Eve is. Yet, surrounded by graduates, you're not sure how you got there. Perhaps you're doing better than you expected, moving up the career ladder faster than you thought you might, especially in comparison to others you see as more intelligent or more likely to succeed than you. Maybe no one expected you to do well, and you believe this too. By most people's standards, you are considered successful, but you don't see yourself this way, and that's where the problem lies. There's no issue with what you're doing by anyone else's standards. It's how you view yourself that is the problem. As you'll see as you work through this book, how you define success is key, and success is different for everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean being the very best at everything you do. It doesn't need to mean a first-class degree, status, fame, or fortune. But even if those things are important to you, if you are unable to internalize any of your successes, your view of yourself can never change. There's a small part of you that knows you're doing well. You see glimpses and occasionally feel it, but those moments don't last long. They're fleeting and hard to hold on to, often drowned out by the louder, more confident and far better rehearsed voice that tells you you're an imposter. This makes it difficult for you to create a different view of yourself that is more consistent with what others see. Overcoming imposter syndrome. How do I know this about you when we haven't even met? I know because this is how imposter syndrome operates. It's a common feeling that, left unchecked, can have a corrosive impact on your life. I know because it doesn't just affect you. You're not the only one who feels a fraud. In fact, so many people do that psychologists came up with a name for it and a set of symptoms. I hope that knowing this brings relief. There's something about putting a name to something that takes away part of its power. Knowing what it is gives you options and makes it easier for you to identify it. Then you can find ways to change the belief, something we'll be doing in this book. Imposter syndrome doesn't discriminate. It affects everyone from college students to CEOs. People from every demographic who are clever, driven, articulate, creative and successful have difficulty in acknowledging their achievements. In my work as a clinical psychologist, I regularly meet people who experience imposter syndrome. They are interesting, hard-working, and their list of achievements is always impressive. Everything they need to enjoy their life is within reach, but because of their feeling of being an imposter, they just can't see this. Often the real problem is an underlying fear of not being good enough. It's my job to show them what I can see in them and help them connect to this new view, building their confidence and belief in themselves so they can enjoy life again. To do this, we identify together how imposter syndrome operates in their life, look back at what may have caused it, and re-evaluate old beliefs. We build an argument against it and a new and more realistic view of what competence means. I've helped many people beat these feelings, and I know I can help you too. I'll be sharing all the ideas and strategies I use in therapy with you so you can move forward, find confidence, and develop a new view of yourself. I don't just see imposter syndrome in my clinic, I see it among my friends and family, and I've experienced it myself. The first meeting I had about this book went well, and I felt that the publisher and I had really connected. As soon as we walked out of the door, I turned to my brilliant agent, Jane, and said, "You know I'll need a really good editor if I get this. I don't think my writing is up to it." I'm sure you can see imposter syndrome in Eve. You might have seen it in others too. In fact, you can feel shocked when some people tell you their truth, but you can't always see it in yourself. I'll be including case studies such as Eve's throughout the book. It can be easier to see how imposter syndrome operates when your own emotions aren't involved. The better you become at recognizing the syndrome in others, the more you'll be able to see it in yourself. Each case study is based on interviews with real people, but the names and some details have been changed for confidentiality. I hope listening to this will make you feel a little less alone. If there's a whole book on this, and I see it again and again in my clinic, then you can't be the only one. When you see how common it is, you may begin to notice, even if only for a moment, that there's something else going on here. And maybe, just maybe, you're not right about yourself. We can't all be imposters, can we? You are not an imposter. I can confidently tell you that you are not an imposter, even though I've never met you and even though I don't know the specific details of your story. But I know that this isn't going to change your mind. Yet. If it could, you wouldn't need this book. I want you to know that there is nothing wrong with you. You have no reason to be ashamed. You've been suffering under a mistaken belief, and this has stopped you from being able to speak up. It's time to get this fear out in the light, to question it and show it up for what it is. a faulty belief. The fact that you've downloaded this book is a really good sign. You don't want to continue to live like this, feeling as though you're winging it, that you are moments away from being found out and humiliated. You're ready for a change. But I also know that the solution is not as simple as just wanting to change. If it was that easy, you'd have let go of these feelings a long time ago. So if you can't go with me yet, think of this another way. Things aren't working for you at the moment. These thoughts are holding you hostage. They might tell you they're keeping you safe, but they're keeping you away from life and the enjoyment of all its pleasures. Can you really continue to live your life like this, condemning yourself to feeling constantly on edge? Does this feeling sour every new promotion, job change or salary increase? Does it filter into your relationships, leaving you unable to show your true self for fear of exposure? You know from experience that further training or success will not change this. The only person who could change this is you. If you fast forward through your life and visualize a future in which you have never tried to change, won't there be some regret? Wouldn't it be better to look back and know you tried? Won't there be more relief and comfort in knowing you've done all you can? What have you got to lose? If you don't try, nothing can change. At least trying means giving yourself a chance at a different life. This might seem scary, but the potential reward is huge. Let me give you this chance. Here's what we will do and how it will help you. You'll free up so much mental space, as you'll no longer be dealing with all the problems that arise alongside imposter syndrome. The emotional drain, the heavy weight, the sheer capacity it takes up. Together, we will build a dossier of evidence to show you that you are not an imposter. This will be based on facts rather than thoughts and feelings, so you can let go of the old beliefs and coping strategies that are holding you back. You will develop compassion for yourself. It's the perfect antidote to the self-critical and perfectionist thinking that can lead to stress, anxiety and depression. This will support you to make the changes you need to, so you no longer feel stuck. You'll see that it's okay to make mistakes and will learn to take failure in your stride. When you accept mistakes and failure as normal and see them as an opportunity to learn, grow and increase resilience, you will find it much easier to let them go. I will show you that insecurity and confidence are not separate but intertwined. Everyone experiences insecurity and lacks confidence at times, and there is strength in vulnerability. You'll see that no one has it together all the time. You'll start to enjoy life again. Self-doubt, overwork and procrastination will become a distant memory. You will experience less anxiety, have closer relationships, and face challenges head-on. This will help you to open up, take risks, and have the confidence to try new things. More than that, you will have an opportunity to see what you're really capable of, a chance to give a voice to the small part of you that knows you could be great. There will be an opportunity to learn new things about yourself and the world, a chance to embrace life and go for it. I know what you're thinking, but I really am an imposter. Imagining a different reality might feel impossible right now. All I'm asking of you is to be open to change. It may not be easy, but wanting to change makes a massive difference. Seeing that there's an alternative offers hope, motivation, and the possibility of living differently. I would like you to see yourself as others do, but ultimately, it doesn't matter what I or others think. What matters is how you see yourself, and it's this I'm determined to change, so you can trust yourself and see just how capable you are. To do this, you're going to need to trust me and give me a chance to convince you. These ideas and techniques are based on my 14 years of clinical experience, my training, and all the evidence-based research in this area. You may have had this idea about yourself for a long time, but that doesn't make it right. When you listen to this book, hold the ideas in mind and try them on for size. Attempt the strategies and allow yourself to think differently. I promise you won't regret it. How to get the most from this book. This book will increase your knowledge and understanding of imposter syndrome. It will help you see how it operates and why, so you can break old patterns and escape its clutches. It will teach you the skills to overcome it, increase your confidence, show you how to take risks, and embrace mistakes and failure. I know you can't believe this yet. Most importantly, it will help you gain a more secure and accurate self-image, so you get to know yourself better, learn to accept positive feedback, have closer relationships, and, finally, begin to believe in yourself. The aim is to help you see yourself differently and gain new perspectives. Imagine you're on a mountain. Until now, you've been standing halfway up, believing that you're seeing an accurate picture of life. I want to take you further up the mountain to a higher vantage point, where you'll have a far better view and can see the world as it really is. For this to work, you'll need to do more than just listen to the book. You'll need to translate the ideas into your own life and try out all the strategies. Yes, all of them. This is a bit like learning to drive. It's all very well passing your driving theory test, but that doesn't teach you how to drive a car. Psychology is the same. The theory is really helpful and interesting, and a first step towards understanding your mind better, but putting these ideas into practice and carrying out the strategies will really make a difference to how you feel. The myth of imposter syndrome. It makes me work hard. It keeps me humble. It means I aim for higher standards. It motivates me. It is better to be modest than arrogant. It keeps me in check. Often people try to convince me that imposter syndrome has its good points and say that it's not all bad. They believe it brings some advantages, that their imposter feelings are a way of ensuring that they don't become arrogant. Also, they think that if you underestimate yourself, this will motivate you to improve. It makes you work harder, aim higher, do better. It keeps you on your toes, stops you getting big-headed or complacent, and will protect you if everything goes wrong. You may feel that it's who you are, which makes you cling to this identity. It has got you this far, so it must be working. It feels risky to try another way. So before we begin, I want to make it clear that there are no advantages to holding on to imposter syndrome. Rather than helping you, imposter syndrome has been holding you back. It makes you feel more anxious. It stops you taking on board any of the good things you do and makes it difficult to enjoy the things you care about. In this book, I will show you both the sacrifices it has forced you to make and the limits it has put on your potential achievements. Of course, no one wants to be arrogant or lack insight, but overcoming imposter syndrome will not cause this. What you are doing is not being modest, but putting yourself down. Acknowledging your own skills, knowledge, and experience is not arrogance. Imposter syndrome is not what pushes you or makes you good at what you do. You are the one that does this. You are hardworking and conscientious. That is the person you are. Wouldn't it be better to be ambitious, take on challenges, have humility and courage without the anxiety imposter feelings can bring and the cost to your health and happiness? Would you like to be able to enjoy your successes and go for the things you want without these old fears holding you back? You'll soon have a chance to see how much better life is without it. 3 key steps to success. Step 1. Wanting to change. Step 2. Understanding the theory. Step 3. Trying out the strategies. Good logic won't be enough. You're going to need to follow all 3 steps for this to work. You need to want to change, to really listen to the new evidence, and you have to test it out. Most importantly, and for some people this will be the most difficult part, you need to let go of the need to be right. I know it's hard to stop and do the exercises, but please give them a go the way I'm suggesting. An idea is less persuasive than actual proof, and you're going to need proof. You've already been told many, many times that you're not an imposter, and so far, it has made 0 difference. Try every strategy, even the ones you think you won't like. In therapy, I find people are often surprised by which strategies work best for them. It's a bit like buying new clothes. As you browse, you pick out the ones you like, but you can't know how they'll look and whether you like them until you try them on. It's only when you're wearing them that you can tell which suit you best. And just as with clothes, there's no one-size-fits-all. You need to work out what suits you. Different approaches work for different people, and by trying out all the strategies, you'll find a range of options that work for you. The more you do, the better chance you will give yourself, and the more arguments you'll store up against the imposter message. It's also important to talk to others about it, to actively open up the conversation. You'll be pleasantly surprised how many people will relate to the way you feel. Start paying attention to it in day-to-day life and seek out others who experience it, whether it's someone well-known or a friend, colleague, family member or acquaintance. Take a minute to look up imposter syndrome online or type #imposter syndrome into Instagram or Twitter and you'll find thousands of posts about it. There are message boards, news articles, personal experiences. I'm not the only one talking about this. Finally, take time to reflect after reading a chapter or trying a strategy. Reflection helps us refine our thoughts, evaluate our capabilities, and set realistic goals, so we keep track of our progress and build confidence in our ability to succeed. We learn much more from our experiences when we reflect on what we've done. To gain the most from the strategies you try, make notes. Buy yourself a notebook to use alongside this book. Writing things down allows you to reflect. It is a great motivator, and you can look back and see how you've done. I love a notebook. There's something about it that feels special. But if you prefer using your phone, you could write in the notes section, whichever is easiest and you're most likely to do. This will help you commit to what you're doing and keep the strategy in mind. Making notes will give you a chance to gain new perspectives and consider an alternative way of thinking about yourself and your achievements. If you accepted the theory, you wouldn't need this book as you know some of the arguments already. You're just choosing to ignore them. There's evidence of your success all around you, and it's time you started seeing it too. While you can't yet be sure that my way will work, you can be sure that what you're currently doing is definitely not working. Think of the time, effort, and energy you're putting into keeping this secret. It's time to try something new, and you may as well give this a proper chance. You deserve to enjoy your life again. I know I can make that happen if you take on board and try out everything in this book. You will feel uncomfortable at first, but don't worry. Growth isn't meant to be comfortable. I'm pushing you out of autopilot and into uncharted territory. You will learn new skills and they will stretch you. It will be like learning a new language. The words will sound strange and clunky at first, but over time, with regular practice and hard work, you will begin to improve and feel less self-conscious. When I work with people, I find that their viewpoint changes and they're able to think differently fairly quickly as long as they're ready and motivated to change. However, it can take a bit longer for their feelings to catch up. It's a matter of, I know it, but I don't feel it yet. Give yourself time. You've had a fixed view of yourself for many years. It won't change overnight, and you need to allow your feelings to catch up with your new thinking. Have faith in the process, and hang on to the hope that there is an alternative viewpoint. I promise it will be worth it. Hard as it might be to believe, you're not so far away from the life you want. Before you continue, take a minute to think about your reasons for change. What do you want to gain from this book? What do you want to be different? Think about the impact this could have. Write these commitments on the first page of your notebook or in your phone notes. I commit to reading and trying out every strategy in this book. I will give this a proper chance. I will talk about imposter syndrome and reflect on everything I learn. Also, write out your top 3 hopes for what you'd like to get out of this book. Section 1. Understanding Imposter Syndrome. Chapter 1. What is Imposter Syndrome? The more you know about imposter syndrome, the better your chance of beating it. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. By the end of this chapter, you should understand that imposter syndrome affects lots of people at different times in their lives. Recognize the negative impact of imposter syndrome. Begin to identify which competence type or types you fall into. I'm so pleased you're giving this a try, and I promise you will find it worthwhile. Before I tackle the causes and symptoms of imposter syndrome, I want to give you a bit of background and explain the science behind it. The more you know about imposter syndrome, the better your chance of beating it. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Imposter syndrome was first described by two clinical psychologists, Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes, in 1978. They noticed that their female students were full of doubt about their abilities and worried about continuing their successes. One female student stated, "I was convinced that I would be discovered as a phony when I took my comprehensive doctoral examination. I thought the final test had come. In one way, I was somewhat relieved at this prospect because the pretense would finally be over. I was shocked when my chairman told me that my answers were excellent and that my paper was one of the best he had seen in his entire career." Together, Clance and Imes conducted interviews with 150 highly successful women, students and professionals, and found that, despite their earned degrees, scholastic honours, high achievement on standardised tests, praise and professional recognition from colleagues and respected authorities, these women do not experience an internal sense of success. They consider themselves to be imposters. As a result of their research, they coined the term imposter phenomenon, a condition in which people believe they are not worthy of success and have a persistent belief in their lack of intelligence, skills, or competence. They refer to an internal experience of intellectual phoniness. These women had achieved success but found it uncomfortable, fearing they had arrived there by mistake or through luck. As a result, they experienced intense feelings that their achievements were undeserved and had an overwhelming fear of everything falling apart, despite evidence to the contrary. Imposter syndrome is technically not a syndrome, as thoughts and feelings of being an imposter that people experience occur in certain situations and are not present all the time. Who does it affect? Imposter syndrome was originally believed to affect a narrow sample of high-achieving women, but psychologists now recognise that it is far more widespread. It particularly affects those who are successful and bright, and those who have no obvious reason to feel insecure, especially those who find it hard to internalise their achievements or recognise the good parts of themselves. The syndrome has a deep impact on many aspects of their day-to-day lives, their jobs, relationships and friendships, as well as their confidence as parents. Despite this, their struggles are often invisible to others. About 70% of people have felt some degree of imposter syndrome, and it is something almost everyone can relate to. It can harm people from all walks of life, affects both men and women, and occurs across different cultures. It affects those in academic settings, undergrads, mature students, PhD students, and even professors. Imposter syndrome is common in all work settings, especially highly competitive business cultures, in which performance is constantly under scrutiny and competition is encouraged. It is also experienced by those who are self-employed, particularly those who work on a project basis and have to actively win work. It can creep into personal lives and can affect relationships. It might make you feel that you are not as good as your friends and make you question why they want to spend time with you. Or you could be the husband who feels his wife will realise the mistake she has made in marrying him, or the working mum who feels a failure because she can't make time for all her children's school events. I think of it as a problem that has its roots in simply not feeling good enough. Instead of seeing this and working to overcome it, your brain concludes that you must be an imposter. The mind trap of imposter syndrome then makes it impossible to revise this belief. The varying degrees of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome runs on a continuum from an occasional worry that you're not up to the task to full-blown fears of being found out. It can cause chronic self-doubt, fear and shame, making it hard to enjoy life or to live in the moment. Trying to pass as something you're not feels incredibly stressful. It can be exhausting keeping the show going. It can also affect you physically with bursts of adrenaline, increased heart rate, a creeping sense of dread or general tension. These thoughts and sensations exacerbate the problem, adding to your feelings of inadequacy and colouring how you think and behave. The syndrome can affect people at different life stages and can increase or decrease in severity depending on what's going on in your life. It may occur in just one area of your life or in specific situations. It might be a thought that only comes up when you're doing something new, or it might manifest as a sudden worry that overcomes you at the worst possible moments. Maybe you've been pushing to be perfect for so long that you no longer see what's driving that push. Or perhaps you have a nagging doubt always in the background, making you feel insecure, prone to procrastination, and unable to reach your full potential. Some people, such as James, can be affected all the time, and this can lead to a terrifying existence. Every time James walks through the door of his big house, he feels he is intruding, that at any moment someone will knock on the door and tell him that this house is not his. He will be told he doesn't deserve to live there and that his life there has all been a mistake. James is 45. He is a successful businessman who has helped to found 2 thriving companies in the tech sector. He has 2 great children and a loving wife. He seems to have everything. In the eyes of his friends and colleagues, James is a success story, someone to live up to. Yet James feels his life is a fraud. He has got where he is through luck, and at any moment this will be exposed and his career will be over. James lives in fear of being found out, and fear of failing himself and his family. This fear affects almost every moment of his waking day. He lives in a constant state of anxiety and has little joy in his work. He finds it hard to enjoy his successes, despite the praise he receives from others. He sees the negatives before the positives and is overcritical of his projects. He looks enviously at other businesses and colleagues and wonders why life is so easy for them and so difficult for him. He has often come close to sabotaging his career. He once resigned from a business in which he was achieving great things to join a smaller business in a lesser role. He felt he was not good enough and was failing badly. It was only a matter of time before he would be forced out. When he resigned, his boss was shocked to discover that James felt he was failing and couldn't keep up. He was a valued member of staff who had been making a great contribution to the business. His boss talked him out of leaving and immediately hired an assistant to help with the workload. That's how highly he rated James. James drinks too much. He drinks to numb anxiety. He drinks to dismiss the memories of his turbulent childhood, and he drinks to push away the highs and lows of everyday life. The effects of this drinking compound his problem. As a result of his heavy morning head, he feels a fraud at home as well as at work. He worries that he could be a better husband and a better father. He could be more present, more kind, more loving. James is finding it more difficult to push his feelings to the back of his mind as he gets older. He has more responsibilities now, a family to look after, staff who depend on his decisions for their livelihood. When he was younger, he pushed on regardless, despite the nagging doubts and insecurities. Now he feels he is at breaking point. Only the support and love of his wife keeps him from falling apart. He has dreams of running away, of burying himself in mounds of pillowy nothingness. The saddest thing is that no one knows that James feels this way. He pushes away those who worry about him and refuses to let them help. He can't see the fulfilling, happy life he could have if he let them in. When you're at the extreme end of imposter syndrome, as James is, it can have an incredibly negative effect on your life. When you try to ignore the problem, its impact is corrosive. Imposter syndrome prevents people believing in themselves, and the more they achieve, the worse they feel. Unable to fully own their accomplishments or good traits, they remain disconnected from all the good things they do. This makes it impossible for them to update their view and build a sense of self-worth or an inner measure of how they're doing. For many others, the effect is less extreme. Whether you are like James, whose confidence and self-belief is constantly undermined by imposter syndrome, or it has a more subtle impact on you, it is a problem that no one should ignore. The negative impact of imposter syndrome. Research has begun to show just how harmful imposter syndrome can be. As well as daily fear and distress, it has a whole host of other negative effects on your behaviour and on how you feel physically and emotionally. For instance, you might wake up feeling anxious, which makes you more likely to have anxious thoughts. You then might start to feel this anxiety as a physical sensation, with increased heart rate or nervous stomach. This physical discomfort can then make it harder for you to focus on your work, causing you to procrastinate. But this link between thoughts, feelings and behaviours is cyclical. They all feed into each other. As you read this next section, consider which symptoms and effects apply to you. These will be good motivators for change. I'm sure it's no surprise to discover that there are links between imposter syndrome and low self-esteem. If you believe you're lacking in some way, you are much more likely to undervalue your achievements and alter your goals and ambitions to reflect your insecurity. Throw in perfectionism and a fear of failure, and it's no wonder you find it so difficult to build an inner measure of how you're doing. This belief also feeds into day-to-day life. When you feel less confident, you worry about your capabilities, and this can inhibit you and prevent you succeeding. When you don't achieve what you set out to do, this proves that your original fears about not being good enough were justified, causing your confidence to drop even further. Overwork, avoidance, self-criticism and self-doubt are a toxic combination, leading to feelings of shame and inadequacy. Insecurity can show itself as self-doubt, or it can switch you into defensive mode, driving you to push others away, as well as making it harder for you to see a different view. The constant stress means you're running on adrenaline and are always on edge, which can result in tiredness, tension, and a loss of motivation. Physical manifestations of the problem can also emerge: migraine, back pain, and autoimmune disorders. The syndrome can cause depression and anxiety and lead to emotional and physical exhaustion. Imposter syndrome has long-lasting effects on careers, undermining professional adaptability. Fear of failure means that students drop out of university, people abandon their dreams, say no to promotions, or, like James, apply for jobs that are beneath them. The imposter doesn't see that failure is a normal part of life. The knock-on effect is that imposters are often not satisfied by their work or career path and may at times feel stuck, while at the same time being more concerned about keeping their current position than pushing on to tackle a new challenge that might expose them as a fraud. Most, although not all, imposters are people-pleasers, constantly trying to adapt themselves, putting others' needs first and not thinking about their own. It's hard to feel close to others when you don't like yourself very much. Trying to be something to everyone means you have nothing left for yourself and can make you feel disconnected from your relationships. You may feel that no one really knows you, that you are misunderstood and alone, and this prevents you feeling close to the people you care about. Or the opposite can happen. You can become controlling towards others. When you set yourself excessively high standards and don't trust yourself, this can make it very difficult to trust others. You may watch everyone closely, be overcritical if people don't do things your way, and find it hard to delegate. This micromanagement and inability to let go leaves you with not just your work, but everyone else's too. It also makes you pretty unpopular and will not get the best out of your team. Many imposters go through life with a fairly negative impression of themselves, at least when they're experiencing a period of imposter syndrome. This limits what you do, stops you trying new things, and prevents you gaining more experience. It becomes harder to achieve your goals, to learn from your mistakes, and therefore to grow and improve. As a result, you rarely experience what it's like to feel good about your work, to properly acknowledge your successes, or discover the excitement of learning and succeeding. This prevents you getting to know your true self and building a realistic internal measure of how you're doing, which means you don't experience the inner stability and calm that comes from acknowledging these things. Why does it happen? Imposter syndrome can be triggered by any achievement or approval-related task, or as a result of feeling insecure about your knowledge or skills, particularly when you work in a competitive atmosphere and when responsibilities increase. It tends to be exacerbated during times of transition or change, or when you're faced with new challenges, such as a new job, project, or being accepted into higher education. This pushes you out of your comfort zone into new routines and puts you under increased scrutiny. There are new codes to learn, a new role to play, and a new way of being. There is also a lot more you don't know, from how to be and how to act, to where the bathrooms and coffee machine are, and these periods tend to involve more evaluation and a heavier workload as you get up to speed. But changes and challenges are not the only things that have an impact. You can have been in a job for a long time and still experience the syndrome if you are unable to update your view of yourself, see yourself as capable, and take on board your achievements. The impact of difference. We know that members of groups who are underrepresented or different from the norm are more likely to experience imposter syndrome. This is because people in these groups feel different from the core group and can't see other people like themselves, which can mean that they don't feel a sense of belonging. They feel they are part of an unfamiliar narrative and find it harder to relate to others around them. When we think about imposter syndrome, it's important to take into account not just how it affects us as an individual, but also the historical, social, and cultural context. This is key to the way it is experienced by anyone who belongs to an underrepresented group or is different from the norm, whether this is because of gender, race, neurodiversity, sexual identity, socio-economic group, or disability. A good example of this is women's football. The performance of the England national women's football team, the Lionesses, in the UEFA Women's Euro 2022 demonstrated that the team had made incredible strides. Yet members of the team had often been prevented from playing football while growing up and had had to make their own teams. Thanks to their perseverance, they succeeded despite the odds, making success easier for the next generation. Young girls now have female role models to look up to, and this has inspired young girls to play football and clubs to make space for them. Let's translate this to a work setting. For example, if you are one of few women in a male-dominated sector, or someone whose ethnicity or socio-economic group doesn't match the dominant group, this can make you feel illegitimate or fake despite your qualifications and accomplishments. You may feel that you have a lot to prove, and this brings even greater expectations. To add to this, you represent not just yourself, but your social group. If others have a negative opinion of your group, the pressure can increase even more. In some circumstances, it can also lead you to believe that you're only there thanks to positive discrimination, so you dismiss your success. Non-typical groups can also be affected by the beliefs and attitudes that everyone holds about social groups and associated biases. These can be both explicit and implicit, and are again shaped by the social, cultural, and historical context we find ourselves in. Explicit biases are those you are aware of on a conscious level. For a feeling to be explicit, you have to consciously express it. For example, if you are ageist, you might think that someone younger or older than you will not be as capable. Implicit bias, also called unconscious bias, refers to attitudes, stereotypes, prejudices, beliefs, and judgments that we unconsciously hold about people or groups. These are outside our conscious awareness and control and affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. We may be unaware of these feelings or unable to pinpoint where they come from, but they can be prevalent and permeate our lives and operate throughout the workplace. The psychologists Mahzarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald were the first to describe implicit bias in a 1995 research paper. They argued that unconscious associations and judgments influence our social behaviours. These are ingrained in our subconscious through our individual experiences, upbringings, and backgrounds. Although we like to imagine that we are objective people who think everything through before committing, the truth is that we all possess implicit biases. It's the way our brains are wired. Listen to more about this in Chapter 4. These implicit biases that we hold unintentionally, can be problematic as they're often automatic and we're unaware of them. Here's a simple example of gender bias from my own life. The postman hands me a letter addressed to Dr. Hibberd and says, "Here's one for your husband." It's not that he's sexist, but he has implicit biases. Historically, a doctor was much more likely to be a man. In a 2023 study, 407 men and women were asked to take a computerized test of implicit bias to see how strongly people link certain concepts, such as man or woman, with job title stereotypes, such as executive or assistant. People tended to respond faster when photos of men and words connected to leadership were put together. When photos of women and leadership-related words were paired together, it took most people longer to respond. Traditional gender norms can also have an impact. There are still far fewer women than men holding senior positions, and although this is changing, not that long ago, women's main life goal was to get married and have a baby. Even now, a woman's successful career is sometimes seen as being at the expense of the family, something that doesn't feature in men's lives. The conflicting messages about achievement can make it difficult to internalise success. These norms also place a greater expectation on men. Society values men who demonstrate high levels of competence, and pressure can make you question whether you can meet expectations and worry you are not measuring up. Over the past few decades, levels of explicit racial bias have thankfully fallen rapidly. While most people don't consider themselves racist, we understand more fully that we hold implicit biases about certain groups as a result of deeper societal issues, which cause unconscious racial bias and systemic oppression. If you're in such a group, you may even have an internalized bias against yourself. This can mean that you feel you have to prove yourself more. Some of my clients tell me that they were also given subtle messages from family members growing up, such as, "Keep your head down," or "Work twice as hard as everyone else." A well-known study published in 2004, Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal?, conducted by Marianne Bertrand and Sendil Mullainathan, is still cited 20 years later. They performed a field experiment to measure racial discrimination in the labour market, replying to help wanted ads in Boston and Chicago newspapers with resumes from potential applicants. To manipulate the perception of race, each resume was given either an African American sounding name or a white sounding name. The results were unambiguous and showed significant discrimination against African American names. Applicants with white-sounding names received 50% more callbacks than those with African American-sounding names. A more recent study by Johns Hopkins University uncovered systemic racial bias in teachers' expectations of students. The study found that when evaluating the same black student, white teachers expected significantly less academic success than black teachers, and this was especially true for black boys. White teachers were 30% less likely to predict that the student would complete a 4-year college degree and almost 40% less likely to expect that their black students would graduate from high school. These low expectations can affect the performance of students and become self-fulfilling prophecies. Neurodiversity is an unseen difference, but our attitudes to it are no less affected by these biases. Our understanding of neurodiversity is still developing. When I undertook my clinical psychology training in 2006, there was little focus on neurodiversity. Mainstream understanding of this area is even further behind. People think of hyperactive boys misbehaving as representative of ADHD, or that the character of Raymond in the film Rain Man is representative of autism. As a result of this lack of awareness, many only find out that they are neurodiverse later in life. Thriving in the workplace as a neurodiverse person can be tough. Neurodiversity can make you feel that you have to camouflage or mask certain traits, or that you have to fake it to fit into a neurotypical world. It can be exhausting trying to conform to social norms, leaving you feeling alone or a fraud. Perfectionism is also more common in this group. Many feel misunderstood, overlooked, undervalued, and at times discriminated against. A 2020 report by the Institute of Leadership and Management revealed that half of managers admit that they would be uncomfortable hiring someone neurodivergent. The highest level of bias was against employees with Tourette syndrome and ADHD. 32% of managers said they would be uncomfortable employing or managing someone with either of those conditions. The figures for biases against other conditions were 26% for dyscalculia and autism, 19% for dyspraxia, and 10% for dyslexia. The report stated that there is a common misconception that people with one of these conditions, such as dyslexia or autism, are less intelligent and less able, whereas in fact there is no association between intelligence and neurodiversity. What do I do with this? I think we all have much further to go in terms of understanding the impact of difference and implicit bias. It may not be possible to eradicate these biases, but continuing to create an awareness that we all possess implicit biases and encouraging an understanding of how they operate within us is the first step. Knowledge leads to action. Knowing where our biases are most likely to creep in lets us see them more clearly, and when we are more conscious of them, we can take proactive steps to address them on a personal basis and within our work. I think it's also important to be aware of the detrimental impact of categories and labels. These can sometimes bring a negative focus or detract from the skills and talents of a group. If you are different from the core group, it's important to think about what you bring as a result of being different. For example, the ability to see things in different ways, different strengths, experience and talents. Rather than moulding yourself to fit into a dominant group, I think it's important to focus on what you add to the group that others cannot. Alongside this comes creating environments that discourage us from being biased. The burden of responsibility shouldn't lie with the individual, but with the environment they're working in and its leaders, who should be creating psychological safety and a sense of belonging, particularly for people who've been repeatedly told they don't belong. It's useful to think about this dual responsibility and how this can be taken into account in the workplace or more widely into society. American activist and lecturer Rachel Cargill describes the importance of something she calls radical empathy. We need to go beyond saying, "I'm sorry for what you're going through, I see you and hear your pain," and consider how we play into other people's pain. If we are part of a dominant group, whether we're neurotypical, did not move through the foster system, or had access to higher education, we need to ask the question, what is it about how I get to exist in the world that affects how you get to exist in the world? When we do this, It allows us to see that the way we move through the world directly affects how others move through the world and experience it. This helps us to change and become more considerate of the way other people experience things. It's not enough to talk about this issue or intellectualize it. We need to engage with it. We need to make a collective effort to shift and undo what has come before and to reimagine what exists, and to make space for something better. As you work through this book, bear in mind that it doesn't matter what your background story is. The approach is the same. These strategies work for imposter syndrome no matter which group you are in. The mind trap of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome normally occurs when there is a tension between two views, yours and what you believe others expect of you. Or the tension could be between the standards you set yourself and how you assess yourself as doing. When the image you have of yourself, a general sense of not being good enough, doesn't match what others see, you conclude that they must have an inflated idea of your abilities, making you feel a fraud. If you don't perform to the highest standards, this leads to feelings of shame and anxiety, and you wrongly conclude that this reveals something essential about your lack of ability and talent. When faced with a new challenge, anxiety increases. Because you lack belief in yourself, you immediately fear that you might not be able to rise to the challenge. Fear of failure and self-doubt drive the cycle. If you fail, you're sure to be found out. The high standards you set yourself are a large part of the problem, as is the negative internal voice you use to motivate yourself. You expect that you need to be the best and do everything flawlessly in your career, relationships, and personal life. This pressure to achieve then goes one of two ways. You either overwork and drive for perfection to reach those lofty standards, or you do the opposite, grinding to a halt, procrastinating, and paralysed by self-doubt. This is often followed by a belated frenzy of work to meet a deadline. You'll do anything to avoid these uncomfortable feelings. Despite all this negative thinking, success often follows. But rather than celebrate this, the overworker interprets achievement as the result of unsustainable levels of effort. The dedication and work they put in is much greater than anyone else's. The procrastinator sees success as due to luck, knowing that they had made a last-minute effort and were winging it. Based on your interpretation, your response is understandable. If you really are a fraud, then you need to do these things to ensure that you are not found out. Everything you do is aimed at stopping others finding out the truth. In the short term, your coping strategies make you feel better, safe, with a chance that you won't be discovered. But if your beliefs about yourself are wrong and you are not an imposter, as I suspect, then these behaviours are part of the problem. What is your competence type? When you think about this cycle, it's clear that your definition of competence has an impact on what you expect of yourself. You have an idea in your head of how well you should do, setting yourself incredibly high and unsustainable standards. If there is a discrepancy between your actual and ideal standards of success, then you disregard what others say, and this strengthens the feeling of being a fraud. Dr. Valerie Young, an expert on imposter syndrome and author of The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It, discovered that imposters experience failure-related shame in different ways, because they don't all define competence in the same way. She uncovered 5 competence types, internal rules that people with imposter syndrome generally follow: the perfectionist, the natural genius, the soloist, the expert, and the superwoman/man. Have a listen to all 5 and see which you recognise. You may find you fit into more than one category. Understanding which category you fall into can be really helpful. Once you're aware of this, it gives you a better chance of understanding the patterns you fall into, and then you can make a conscious choice to change. The perfectionist. Perfectionism and imposter syndrome often go hand in hand, and this is the most common type of imposter. As Young writes, The perfectionist's primary focus is on how something is done. This includes how the work is conducted and how it turns out. Perfectionists set excessively high standards for themselves and believe they should deliver a perfect performance 100% of the time, thereby creating a cycle where their best efforts are never good enough, even when they reach 99% of their goals. Perfectionists have a very specific vision of what they want and a very precise plan to reach it. They believe that there is a right way and a wrong way to do things. There's no room for a detour or a different outcome. They're never content with anything unless it is of the highest possible quality, and, rather than celebrating the things they did well, they tend to focus on the areas where they could have done better. Perfectionists imagine that others hold them to these standards and often measure friends, family and work colleagues by them too. Sadly, no one can possibly live up to them. Perfectionists tend to believe that if you want something done right, you must do it yourself, and as a result find it difficult to trust in others' abilities, fearing that they won't do it properly. Perfectionists may also find it difficult if they are not in control. If you're a perfectionist, when you don't do things perfectly, as no one can, you experience self-doubt and worry, ashamed that you're not measuring up and have failed. This drive for perfection and fear of failure can leave you deliberating over micro details, either procrastinating or overworking. It might also mean you give up on things too quickly if you find them difficult or can't do them perfectly. When perfection is the aim, everything is always going to fall short, and success is seldom satisfying. The natural genius. Jung's second competence type is the natural genius. The natural genius cares how and when accomplishments happen. They set their internal bar impossibly high, just like perfectionists, but rather than judging themselves by an unrealistically high standard, they judge themselves on whether they get things right at the first try. Jung found that for this group, true competence means having inherent intelligence and ability. There is no room for development. When they can't get something right on the first try, struggle to master a new skill or take too long, by their own judgment, to do something, this evokes feelings of shame and leaves them feeling like an imposter. As such, natural geniuses strive to master any new skill quickly and with little effort. They believe that if they have to work hard at something, then they must not be very good at it. Competence means being able to do things quickly and easily, and if they need to learn something new, development should be effortless. When this isn't the case, they believe they must be doing badly. They're often overly optimistic about how much they can get done in the time available, and when progress is slower than expected, they feel disappointed in themselves. If you were a natural genius, you probably got by in school without studying, but gave up at the first sign of a challenge if you weren't top of the class. As a result, you have little practice at perseverance, a necessary life skill. When you start doing something new and have difficulty achieving it, you immediately think something is wrong with you, rather than seeing you haven't given yourself enough time. Setbacks completely throw you, and you avoid taking risks in case you fail. The soloist. The soloist defines competence as being able to do something on their own and believes that achievement only counts if it is unassisted. Jung found that the soloist cares mostly about who completes the task. To do well, they believe they must be able to do it on their own. Soloists typically turn down help so they can prove their worth as an individual, and if they need help, they see it as a sign of failure, which evokes feelings of shame and triggers imposter feelings. Soloists value independence over everything else, including their own needs. They are unwilling to ask for support, even if a project is not going well, or the sheer amount of work needed to make it succeed is killing them. When they struggle or feel stuck, it can lead to procrastination to avoid admitting defeat. If you're a soloist, you tend to think you need to work out and do everything on your own. You view projects, accomplishments or ideas that were derived in conjunction with someone else as not being your own achievement. Asking for help is a sign of weakness, and you fear it might reveal your incompetence. The expert. Jung's fourth competence type is the expert. As Jung explains, the expert is the knowledge version of the perfectionist. They need to know it all and believe true competence means knowing absolutely everything. Here, the primary concern is on what and how much you know or can do. They believe if they were really clever, they would already know everything they need to know to master a challenge before they even start. They do not feel satisfied until they have a comprehensive understanding of a subject. When experts don't know the answer to every single question, they blame themselves for being incompetent instead of acknowledging their skill gaps and working to fill them. They deeply fear being exposed as inexperienced or lacking knowledge and endlessly seek out more information, which is often just another disguise for procrastination. If they don't fit every single requirement in a job description, experts are unlikely to apply. They may think they have somehow tricked their employer into hiring them and imagine that their employer expects them to know more than they do. They often falter before beginning a job or task, and even if they've been in their role for some time, they feel like they still don't know enough. If you're an expert, you'll have a degree, maybe more than one. Despite completing multiple courses, it's never enough, and there's always something more you feel you need to know. This drives you to gain as much knowledge and as many skills as possible, believing that there must be a certain threshold of experience that is needed to be successful or considered competent and skilled, rather than learning as you go. You continuously hunt for new information, which can sometimes get in the way of completing tasks and projects. The superwoman/man. The supers push themselves to work harder than everyone else. Jung finds this competence type measures competence based on how many roles they can both juggle and excel in: boss, colleague, partner, parent, friend, volunteer, host. They expect that they should be able to fulfill them all perfectly and with ease. If they fall short in any of their self-designated roles, they feel shame because they believe they should be able to handle everything. Supers set unrealistically high standards in every area and are, like the perfectionist, on turbocharge. Jung differentiates the two by how they interpret their competence, with the super defining it based on their ability to perform perfectly in multiple roles versus the perfectionist who cares predominantly about their work, career, or studies. Supers often excel in all areas because they push themselves so hard and want to juggle all of their roles perfectly. This can lead to living overextended lives. Trying to do everything at home alongside succeeding at work and never allowing themselves a break, supers are addicted to the validation that comes from working rather than the work itself. This overload of pressure will eventually result in burnout, which can affect physical and mental health and relationships with others. You're a super if you measure yourself not just on how well you do things, but also on how many things you can juggle at one time. You believe you can do it all and are unable to say no, even if you're struggling to keep up with everything. You have an unrealistic view of how much is possible and are switched on all the time, unable to enjoy downtime or non-achievement-based activities. Before you go, think about the following and write your thoughts in your notes. Which imposter types fit with your ideas of competence? What impact does this have on how you do things? What negative effects is imposter syndrome having on your life?